Good afternoon and welcome to this event where today we're going to be exploring university courses in anthropology. I'm Jon Cheek, I'm here from UniTasterDays and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by two fantastic speakers. I'm joined by Professor Kate Hampshire and also Professor Sarah Alton from Durham University. And Kate and Sarah are going to provide a brilliant introduction to looking at anthropology and offering different perspectives on the anthropology programme. With these events, I'm always very conscious that you're here to hear from our excellent speakers, not from myself. So if I can pass things to Professor Kate Hampshire, Professor with Durham University, please.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for asking us to do this session this afternoon. So as John said, I'm Kate Hampshire. I'm currently head of department for the anthropology department at Durham University. And we thought this would be a particularly useful session to do because, of course, anthropology is not an A-level subject. And so often people know very little about anthropology when they're thinking about their university courses. In fact, I only came across anthropology as an 18-year-old when I was browsing through the university prospectus and found anthropology just because it began with an A. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. But so that you can make a rather more informed choice, we thought that Sarah and I will give you a whistle-stop tour of the discipline and let you know a little bit about some considerations that you might have in mind if you're thinking about studying anthropology at university. Good. So I'm going to talk about what anthropology is and why you might want to study it at university. So anthropology, the word anthropology actually comes from two Greek words, anthropos, meaning human, and logos, meaning to study. So anthropology is literally the study of human beings. And as I'll go on to explain, anthropologists study humans over very different kinds of timescales and in very different kinds of ways. But underlying all of this is one big question. What does it mean to be human? And if we can break that down, we can think about two questions that come under that, really. First of all, unity. What is it that we have in common as human beings? What do we share? And secondly, we might think about diversity. So how are we different? How does the meaning and experience of being human vary, for example, at different times, in different places, and in different cultural settings? So anthropology is a really broad discipline because there's so much about being human. And there are different branches of anthropology, and it's quite important to remember this if you're thinking of applying to university, because some universities specialise in one branch, some specialise in another branch, and some, like Durham, basically do the whole thing. So most UK universities specialise in sociocultural anthropology, this one here, which is basically the comparative study of the ways in which people live in different parts of the world, in different cultural and social settings. In the US, it's usually called cultural anthropology. The other major branch of anthropology, which fewer departments do, but there are some good departments of biological or evolutionary anthropology. And this is the study of human evolution. You ask in biological anthropology how we came to be here and how our evolutionary past shapes who and what we are today. And then at the intersection of these, you get all sorts of exciting other kinds of anthropology. So the anthropology of health and medicine, which is another thing that we do at Durham. Other universities like UCL also do this. So this seeks to understand the biological and the social basis of human health and illness and how these come together. Now, there are all kinds of other disciplines that intersect in interesting ways with anthropology, and many of these you may be more familiar with. So many students come to anthropology from backgrounds like biology or psychology or archaeology, geography, sociology, and all of these have different intersections that I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk. So, as I said, the most widely studied branch of anthropology in the UK is social anthropology. This is the branch of anthropology you would study if you went to universities like LSE, Manchester, Edinburgh, St Andrews, and many others. And the focus in social anthropology is understanding human society and culture in different contexts around the world. So I've just put on this slide here some examples of some of the things that social anthropologists study. So, for example, family and kinship. Social anthropologists are interested in the way in which people organise themselves in different parts of the world into family units and how people think about relationships with one another within these kinds of family units. So for example, in some societies, family units are organised in quite small groups, nuclear families perhaps. In other societies, or even within the same society, you may get very different kinds of household organisations. For example, much larger or multi-generational households. And these things change over time. So for example, in the UK, over the last few decades, we've seen a real shift away from what we might think of as the traditional nuclear family towards a much greater range of ways that people live and ways that households are set up as different kinds of relationships become increasingly normalized. And then, of course, you've got new technologies coming into this. So, for example, assisted reproduction or surrogacy, which really complicate the way in which we think about families and the way that we think about what it means to be related to somebody else. So there's ideas like blood ties and genetic links, but it's clearly not all about that. There's lots of different things that go into how we relate to different human beings around us. Another topic that social anthropologists have studied for a long time is about gift giving and exchange. So we tend to think that when you give somebody a gift, you do it because you just want to give somebody a gift because it's a generous and nice thing to do. But for a long time, anthropologists have realized that there's a lot more to it than that. So a very famous anthropologist, Marcel Mauss, writing now nearly 100 years ago, wrote a book called The Gift, in which he argued that there's effectively no such thing as a free gift. You never give something without some kind of expectation being there. Sometimes that's an expectation that you'll get something back, another gift back. Sometimes it's an expectation, and if you don't fulfill that expectation, it becomes problematic. So for example, if you're in a Secret Santa at Christmas and you don't contribute to the Secret Santa, you don't give a gift, that may have kind of consequences. Likewise, if you go to a wedding and you don't give a gift. So the times when gift giving is expected and not giving a gift becomes problematic. Gifts can also cement social relationships. So for example, if you go around to somebody's house for dinner, you may bring a bottle of wine or some chocolates or some flowers, and that's all part of a sort of social relationship that you're expressing with the people that you're eating with. Sometimes they can signify power and status. So the kind of expensive gift you give, you know, when foreign dignitaries give a gift to the Queen or the Prime Minister, the kind of gift they give and the value of the gift matters a lot in terms of the negotiations that will follow. Another example of something social anthropologists are really interested in is ritual and religion. So ritual, along with kinship and gift giving, seems to be a universal of all human societies. And anthropologists study the ways that ritual help us make sense of life, in particular life's changes and transitions. So some rituals that we observe mark a change of status from one kind of status to another. So for example, when you get married, you change from being a single person to a person whose life is bound up with somebody else's and sometimes a whole other family or in-laws. And this is marked through people coming together. Similarly with graduation. Other rituals mark changes in seasons or annual events, things like birthdays, Christmas, bonfire night. I'm sure you can think of many others. Some mark kind of even more fundamental passages coming into the world and out of the world through baptisms and funerals. It's quite interesting to think that in a society like the UK, which is increasingly secular, nonetheless, a lot of these rituals take place in religious settings. And so anthropologists try to understand why that kind of thing happens and how rituals change over time. Now, how do anthropologists or social anthropologists do this? The basis, the fundamental kind of building block of social anthropology is ethnographic fieldwork. Ethnography is another word that comes from the Greek. Again, two words kind of stuck together, ethnos meaning people or folk, and graphos meaning I write. So it's about learning, understanding, and writing about other people. Now, traditionally, social anthropologists conducted fieldwork in distant, exotic locations, often living for months or many years, sometimes with the people that they studied, and trying to become really integrated into those societies to see it from the inside. And this is still an important part of what social anthropologists do today. So for example, you can see this picture on the top left here. This is me 30 years ago doing my PhD fieldwork. I did my fieldwork in the north of Burkina Faso in West Africa. And I lived for a year and a half with a group of Fulani pastoralists, cattle herders. So you've probably heard of the Maasai. The Fulani are sort of the West African equivalent. And so I lived for a year and a half, traveling around on the edge of the Sahara Desert, living in these camps that we built each week and then dismantled and moved everything on donkeys and camels and stuff from one place to another. Here's me collecting some water from a small well. So this is, and when I was there, I spent that time learning the language, learning the customs, trying to understand as much as I possibly could about what it meant to be a Fulani and how Fulani society was working, particularly in the context of a lot of social and political change. But recently, the field of social anthropology has expanded enormously. So it's no longer just about going for a long time to a faraway exotic place. I personally have done field work much closer to home in County Durham, for example, with community choirs, trying to understand how music enables people to form new kinds of social relationships. And global connections are also important. No longer does it really make sense to study a society in isolation, because we know that so many ideas and people, money, influence travels around the world. So I'm currently involved in a research project looking at fake medicines or poor quality medicines and how those move across the world. So my field work at the moment takes me really all over the place, from warehouses in Ghana to production lines in India to the World Health Organization in Geneva and many, many other places, as basically I'm following these supply chains of medicines and regulations around the world. A lot of anthropologists also do online ethnography today. So much of our social life at the moment, today, and particularly, I guess, during these times of COVID, happens online. So anthropologists also work and conduct the same kind of field work online. But underneath all of this is still this idea of ethnography, which is a particular kind of attention to the world and how people make sense of it, and really trying to understand what the world looks like from others' point of view. So just to give you some examples of the vastness really of social anthropological inquiry, here are a few books published by some of my colleagues in Durham, literally in the last 2 or 3 years. So anything from see a book called Electrifying Anthropology, Back to the Post-Industrial Future, working on post-carbon futures and sort of imagining human society, adapting to climate change and what that means. This is a book, Assisted Reproductive Technologies in the 3rd phase, that I edited with my colleague Bob Simpson, looking at how assisted reproductive technologies move around the world and what happens when they move into different kinds of cultures and societies. Actually, day after tomorrow, this book, Out of Thin Air, is going to be launched. And this was written by a new colleague, Michael Crawley, who spent a year and a half training with elite athletes, marathon runners in Ethiopia. So that's a really fascinating book. So it's really huge, the study of social anthropology. Yeah. I'm now going to move on to the other major branch of anthropology that's taught in fewer universities, but nonetheless still several universities in the UK. And this is biological and evolutionary anthropology. So biological and evolutionary anthropologists try to understand how we got to be where we are and as we are, how we evolved and how our evolutionary past shapes what we are today. And they do this in various different ways, through studying remains of prehistoric societies, intersecting really with archaeology, studying our close primate relatives, and also some experimental work on the evolution and transmission of ideas and cultural practices. Because we're primates, humans are primates, we share many common characteristics with monkeys, and especially with the great apes, who are our closest living relatives. So, for example, in common with the great apes, humans have an extended period of infancy. If you look at many other animals, basically they give birth and then leave the young to fend for themselves pretty quickly. But humans, in common with other primates, feed and nurture their young for a long time, teaching them the skills they need to thrive and survive. Tool making is something else that we have in common with our great ape relatives. It used to be thought that tool making was a uniquely human trait, but it's now well known that gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans also make tools. So you can see here this kind of hammer and anvil tool, which is used to crack nuts. So again, we can trace something about ourselves back to our primate ancestors and relatives. Another example is sociability. So in common with other primates, we are highly social animals. Many primates express this through mutual grooming. So one monkey or ape may spend several hours grooming another. And we express this in different kinds of ways, this sociability, coming together, eating together, doing stuff together. And as we know at the moment, that's why COVID-19 is really problematic for many people, because it precisely stops something that's absolutely hardwired into us, this kind of need to be with other people and to be sociable. But of course, although we have a lot in common with our primate ancestors and relatives, we're also different, and being human is a unique thing in lots of different ways. So we can think about the evolution of language, the fact that humans have developed larger brains, opposable thumbs, development of complex technology, art, social institutions, music, and we can pinpoint kind of more or less the time when humans diverged from our primate ancestors. And a lot of the biological anthropologists are interested in thinking about why, when, and how these uniquely human capacities evolved. So what were the selective pressures that drove the development of language? Why and when did we start making more complex tools and art and music? Why did these changes occur, particularly in the human lineage and not in other apes? To answer these questions, biological anthropologists have to integrate evidence from diverse kinds of data. So the fossil record, archaeology, primatology, and sometimes the study of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies. And one really remarkable thing about humans is just how adaptable we are and just how flexible we are. So it's now widely agreed that humans evolved in Africa, and since expanding throughout Africa and beyond, across the globe, humans have survived and thrived in all different kinds of environments, from the Arctic North to deserts to tropical rainforests, many, many other places. And so we're incredibly flexible as a species. Now, some of that flexibility comes from genetic variation. So, for example, skin color varies with proximity to the equator. And that's in order to regulate the body's exposure to ultraviolet light, ultraviolet radiation, and thus the production of vitamin D. I won't go into more detail, but it's quite interesting. Other human variations are developmental. So if you grow up at high altitude, like some of those Ethiopian marathon runners that Mike work with, then you grow greater lung capacity than if you grow up somewhere like Durham at sea level. But mostly, and this is really important to emphasize, most of human adaptation is not biological or genetic, it's behavioral, cultural, and technological. So it's about, how humans moving into new environments figured out ways to hunt and fish in very different conditions, to building, constructing shelters, exploring medicinal properties of local plants, domesticating animals. So it's this in particular, linked, of course, to our brain size and our sociability, which means we've done this as groups, that has enabled humans to spread across the world in so many different places. And several of my colleagues in biological anthropology at Durham work in the field of cultural evolution, of trying to understand not just how people or genetic evolution works, but how the evolution of culture and ideas works. So I've got a colleague, Sally Street, for example, who works on the evolution of music. Another colleague, Jamie Tarani, that has traced the way that folk tales like Little Red Riding Hood spread across the world and how they change as they go. And others have looked at the evolution of cooperative behaviors and what kinds of factors trigger people to cooperate and or to compete. So Biological and social anthropology are the two major branches of anthropology taught within the UK. And a few universities, not very many, but a few universities, including my own university at Durham, offers degrees which bring these together and enable you to integrate the biological and the social. And for me, this is where it becomes particularly exciting. Because for me, human beings are inherently social and biological beings, and it's very hard to tease the two apart fully. In fact, new research shows that we can never fully separate the biological and the social, or even in some cases, the human from the non-human. And some of these exciting developments come from the field of medical anthropology, which, as I've said, is a branch that cuts across and brings together social and biological anthropology. So, for example, we're learning now that certain kinds of social experiences, the experience of being traumatized or stressed, for example, have physical manifestations on the body that actually can transfer from generation to generation through epigenetics. So in a sense, our bodies actually incorporate the physical world and can transmit that into the future generations. New research on gut biomes, etc., really challenges the idea that humans are discrete entities. Instead, it seems more like that we're kind of colonies of organisms. And so again, thinking about where the human ends and microbes begin becomes complex. And with new technologies like genetic medicine, life support, replacement organs, artificial intelligence, there are really important questions that anthropologists are grappling with about the limits of humanity. Is there a point at which we stop being human, or how does humanity intersect with technology and with non-human living and non-living beings throughout the world? As well as those kinds of philosophical questions, anthropology, and particularly the kind of bringing together of social and cultural anthropology, can help us address some really, really important real world problems in many, many different fields. So, for example, the kind of obesity epidemic, as it's called, why do we overeat? We can understand from biological anthropology some of the evolutionary basis of our attraction to certain kinds of foods. And from social anthropology, we can understand how certain kinds of social institutions encourage us perhaps, or in some cases oblige us to eat things that may not be optimal. Anthropology can ask questions about how we address the challenges of post-carbon futures and how we imagine ourselves in futures that may be very different from our experience today. And of course, at the moment, thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of anthropological work going on currently about how understandings of human behavior, as well as about kind of pharmaceutical governments at a global level, can help us respond to a pandemic. So hopefully I've got you thinking a little bit about anthropology and what anthropology can do and why anthropology might be an interesting subject to study. If you think you might want to have a look at anthropology at university, I just want to take you through a few considerations when applying. So the first thing about applying to anthropology, to study anthropology at university, is that because we don't have an A-level subject in anthropology, then we don't, I think would say all the British departments have no particular A-level requirements in terms of which subjects you do. So we have people coming from a variety of different subjects. Most often, I guess, things like biology or sociology or psychology, but have people coming from maths and science backgrounds. We have people coming from arts and humanities background, because all of these have something to contribute. And actually, one of the great things about teaching anthropology is precisely having students from so many different backgrounds there in the classroom. So we're looking generally not for people with particular skills, but we're looking for candidates who are really passionate about the subject, who get really excited about some of the questions that I've been talking about. And people are really willing to challenge themselves because it's a challenging subject in all kinds of ways. And personal statements can be very important in explaining why it is really that you want to be doing anthropology. And I would say another thing about applying for anthropology at university is that diversity and inclusivity are absolutely central to our discipline. And we and other universities offering anthropology are really keen to bring students from all different kinds of social backgrounds and walks of life. And it's that richness really that makes it such a kind of exciting classroom dynamic. So if you are thinking about applying to do anthropology at university, which university should you apply to? There was quite a lot of universities that offer anthropology. And in addition to the usual kinds of considerations, like what grades do you need for A-level, or do you want to be at a campus or a city university? There are some particular things that are worth thinking about if you want to apply to do anthropology. So probably the biggest one is, which branch or branches are you most interested in, or do you want to combine them? So as I said, social anthropology is the most widely taught branch of anthropology in the UK. But some universities do biological anthropology, and some, like Durham, specialise, I guess, in a kind of broad-based, what we call integrated anthropology, bringing the two together. Do you want to study anthropology alongside another subject? So many universities offer joint honours programmes between anthropology and something that kind of goes alongside it, like archaeology, psychology, or sociology. I'd also encourage you to think what really excites you about anthropology, and where are the people doing that work? So, you know, look around different departments and see where the academics are that are doing real cutting edge work in the things that excite you. You may also want to think whether there are opportunities to do a year abroad, a study abroad year, and whether there are opportunities within the degree to do your own fieldwork. So I'll give an example of Durham. Of course, that's the course I know the best because this is where I am. So in Durham, for example, we offer 3 single honours programmes, a BSc and a BA in anthropology and a BSc in health and human sciences. And then we offer various joint and combined honours programmes that include anthropology. So because we're a broad-based department, basically all students coming to us begin by studying evolutionary, social and medical anthropology in the first year, and then in the second and third years, people can choose to specialise more in one of those fields, or they can choose to continue this kind of broad-based approach. And I said, you know, some universities do and some don't do fieldwork. For us, fieldwork's really important, and it's a core part of all of our single and joint honours degrees. So at the top of the screen here, you'll see some students on Coll, an island in the Scottish Hebrides, doing fieldwork. At the bottom here, you can see students in a primate research centre in South Africa, where I go each year with students. Sarah Elton, who you'll hear from in a minute, does the Coll field trip. For us, fieldwork's really important, and anthropology is by its nature a fieldwork-based discipline. We see it as a core part of our degrees. As I said, all of our students do it. And in their third year here, all of our students do a 2-week placement, two weeks, residential field course. And we feel this is really important for 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons. Firstly, as I say, it's a practical subject, anthropology, in many ways. So you can get a lot by reading, but there's a certain amount that you can't really understand until you actually do it yourself, till you do field work yourself. So you can see this from the speech bubble on the left, which one of our students said. The other thing about field work is it gives you a lot of skills, some specialist skills within anthropology, like interviewing and handling data, and a lot of transferable skills that a lot of employers value. For example, being adaptable, thinking on your feet, being creative, problem solving, working as a team, being motivated in the face of adversity, because something always goes wrong in field work. That's the one thing you can guarantee, is that not everything will go as planned. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Sarah Elton, who will take you through some other aspects of studying a degree in anthropology, and I will also talk a little bit more about careers opportunities afterwards, because we appreciate that it's one thing to be really engaged and excited of what you're studying at university, but many people also, reasonably enough, want to have an eye on where it's going to take them afterwards. So Sarah, I will hand over to you now.
Thanks, Kate. That was really, really interesting. And one of the things that Kate said that we want to emphasise is anthropology is a very, very practical subject. I'm in our lab at the moment, and one of the things that you may not be able to do when you're looking around universities this year is to actually go into the lab and feel real specimens. So we thought we'd try and do the next best thing, which is show you a few things. So I'm a biological anthropologist, and also, as Kate says, biological anthropologists work on a number of different things related to human biology and human evolution, as well as primatology. So as part of my career, I've worked with modern humans and to find out how much energy they expend when they're exercising, for example. But what I do now as my day job is look at what monkeys look like, which is a pretty cool job, I think. So I've got a monkey here. I'm just pass it over. And you can see this monkey here. We can look at its skeleton, and I study the bones and teeth of monkeys. But one of the really interesting things when we look at the diversity of primates, this is a plastic vertebral column of a human there. And you can see when I compare it against this monkey, sorry, I've not got 16 hands. But you can see when I compare it against that vertebral column is much bigger than the vertebral column of this monkey here. However, there are lots of similarities that show our shared ancestry. And that's another thing that biological anthropologists and evolutionary anthropologists are really interested in looking at. So I've got this very interesting specimen here. This is a Paranthropus robustus from South Africa. So about 1 million years old, and this is taken out of dug up out of a cave. And people have studied this and say, wow, this is closely related to humans, but doesn't it look different? I've got a human skull here, and you can see how different those two look. And they're different because they do different things. And so this specimen here, SK48, probably ate lots of tough foods. And this specimen here, a plastic modern human, cooks a lot of its food. So it doesn't need such heavy musculature in its face that you have when you have something like that. And so this is one of the things that we do as biological anthropologists. I'm going to show you this little specimen, again, a hominin from Southern Africa. This is a juvenile. And we can not only look at the external form, but we can look at CTs of its teeth and take sections of the teeth of fossils to see how they grew up, how long it took them to get to adulthood, and to think about their life history. And that was one of the things that Kate said, wasn't it? About looking and comparing us to other primates and to other groups of organisms to see partly what makes humans special, but also what makes us very normal mammals. And so this is what we do as biological anthropologists day in, day out. If you come and do an anthropology degree in places where they do biological anthropology, one of the first things you'll do, and excuse me for reaching over the camera again, but here I have some human bones, again, plastic bones. You'll get plastic bones to look at and you'll learn the names of them. And you start off your journey into biological anthropology with those very simple steps. And then hopefully at some point, you may go off and be a professional anthropologist looking at these things in the field. And that brings me to the second thing I want to talk to you about, and that is what you can do with an anthropology degree. So I'm just going to share my slides here. I've got a slideshow on the go. I'm hoping I can share my screen. There we go. And here we have it. So the careers that you can do with an anthropology degree. So anthropology is not a subject we study at school, is it? It's not something you think, oh, I'll go and do anthropology and I'll become an anthropologist. It's not a career we really think of going into. And you can go into being an anthropologist from an anthropology degree. I did that. Kate did that. Lots of our colleagues did that. But in fact, most of the time people go into other degrees, into other careers. And so what can you do with an anthropology degree? Well, lots of things. So anthropology gives you a really broad training in understanding humans. It also helps you to think really critically. So lots of things that Kate was saying, people think critically about what Big Pharma is doing, for example. And it also lets you work independently. And this is one of the things that we're interested in doing as anthropologists, training other people in anthropology, is getting them to work independently. And this is one of the reasons we have such an emphasis on field work and practical work, because one of the best ways to work independently is to get your hands dirty and go and do the work yourself. So anthropology opens up lots and lots of really varied careers. And I'll give you a couple of examples on the next slide, but it also opens up postgraduate training for vocations such as law and teaching. So we've had students who've come in to do an anthropology degree because they're interested in anthropology, who've then gone on to do postgraduate qualifications in other subjects. So you don't necessarily have to just focus on doing one thing from the age of 18. You can do something that you're interested in and then go and retrain after your first degree. So all of those options are open to you. And the Prospects website gives you some information about what you can do with an anthropology degree. I've got the link here that you can hopefully click on when you get these slides. And this will give you an indication of the sorts of careers that anthropologists are really good at. And at Durham, we've got lots and lots of different people in different types of jobs now who graduated from us very recently. So a police officer, an accountant, lawyers, science writers, sports coaches, people who work in human resources, NHS and public health. So we've had students who've gone to work for the WHO, for example. People have gone into the civil service, and we've got an insurance broker in one of our recent graduate cohorts. So lots and lots and lots of different careers, as well as just being an anthropologist. So do consider anthropology not only as a degree, it's incredibly interesting, exciting. Kate and I both love being anthropologists, but also as a degree that really equips you well for further professions, not only ones that are related to working with health of people or NGOs or anything like that, but also professions like law, like teaching, like the police, that allow you to go in and use your people skills in very different ways. So with that, I'm going to pass you back over to Kate.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's true, yes, our graduates go into all kinds of different things. Some of mine recently, one of them's now a development worker in, where she is, I think somewhere in Latin America. Another one's actually gone to be an undertaker. She got really interested in death rituals, and that's where she's gone. I just want to offer some final reflections really on on anthropology and why I love anthropology, and why after many, many years, more than 30 years, it still gets me out of bed in the morning. So I think one thing that anthropology really does is it challenges me. Anthropology is a really challenging subject, and I don't mean that in terms of it being difficult. It is difficult in some ways, but it really gets us to ask important questions of ourselves. So there's an old adage that anthropology is about making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So making the strange familiar is all about going to different places in the world, working with different kinds of people, and really beginning to understand from their perspective how they see the world, and feel at home with people and customs and places that initially seemed strange. And that's really exciting. That's really exciting. But I would say that equally exciting is the other part of it. It's about making the familiar strange. It's about stuff that we do every day in our own culture and society, things that we take for granted, things that might seem normal to us, but perhaps would be strange to an outsider. For example, why is it okay to wear certain clothes on the beach, but not at school? Why do we usually call our friends and siblings by their first names, our parents and grandparents by kinship name, mum or dad or granny or grandpa, whereas teachers we call by a title, Mrs. something, Mr. something, Dr. something? What would happen if we didn't do that? What would happen if we start calling our brothers and sisters brother and sister, or our teachers by their first names? Why do we eat? Why do we eat the things we do? Why do we eat breakfast cereals at breakfast, not in the evening? Why do many people in the UK feel quite happy to eat shrimps and prawns, but would not be so happy to eat their close relatives like woodlice? This quote I love at the bottom. It says the last thing a fish would ever notice would be water. In other words, things that are so familiar to us, we don't tend to question, and anthropology makes us question them and makes us see ourselves and our world in a different way. But anthropology is also a really outward-looking subject, and as well as challenging ourselves, anthropology can really help us to make a difference in the world. So anthropologist Ruth Benedict, writing many years ago, said that the purpose of anthropology is to make the world safe for human differences. And I would suggest that this has never been more important than today. I'm just going to leave you with the words of Jim Yong Kim, who is the previous president of the World Bank. He said, we have to try to understand how people from very different backgrounds see the world. And even if we don't agree with them, at least have some empathy from their particular worldview. I think that is in fact the task of leaders in the world today, to spread that idea and ethic throughout the world. Anthropology, in my view, does that better than any other disciplines. Thank you, Jon. We'll leave it there. And thank you very much, all of you, for listening. And I wish you well, wherever you go, whatever you study.